The first time that I played Dungeons and Dragons, I knew that I had found something special because even though I did not understand the rules or the game mechanics, I was deeply invested in my character. I had spent time creating a backstory for her, as well as when I was playing the game, I thought about her future based on the decisions I was making. I even found myself thinking about her when I wasn't playing the game. Fast forward 8 months, I'm still playing, scrolling through my social media news feeds, and I come across this homemade advertisement. It says, Dungeons and Dragons, regular weekly meetings can help with social skills. And in that moment, it was like the fog cleared or the light bulb went off. And this was that missing piece. This was that thing that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was helping me with my social skills. I began to wonder what it would be like if I created an intentional game, building specific social skill opportunities into the game. I decided to see if there was anything like this out there. Went online, did a quick internet search, and I discovered the world of applied RPGs, or applied role-playing games. And these are folks using things like Dungeons and Dragons to help people with things like social skill development. I reached out to an organization that was pretty well established in the field and doing work similar to what I was thinking of doing, and asked them if there was a way I could bring social skill development for teenagers into my own community. They said to me, well, you have this background in leadership development. What if you built a sandbox and scaffolded your organization based off of that? From there, Role Play Lead was born. I have had the amazing privilege of having amazing kids at my table. But one student's story in particular stands out, and I'm going to share that with you today. When this student joined Role Play Lead, they sat at my table with this deep-seated fear of failure and an overcompensation into perfectionism. This manifested in a variety of ways. This student, for example, if they didn't know the answer or didn't think they had the right answer, they chose not to say anything. On the flip side, if they believed they had the best answer, it was their answer only, and they weren't interested in anyone else's, nor did they ask for help. As you can imagine, that created some interesting tensions at the table and played out in some really interesting ways. On the flip side, because they stretched into this perfectionism, they read all of the books. They knew every detail in and out of the rules of everything, and if anyone tried to stray from them just the tiniest little bit, they would step in and correct them, again, creating some tension. Fast forward for a full school year, and I decide to send out a survey to the parents. I want to make sure I'm on the right track, that they're seeing the growth that I'm seeing. This parent, the parent of the student, response was really interesting. First, they said prior to starting with Role Play Lead, this student was leaving the classroom 4 to 5 times a week because they were having panic attacks and anxiety. A half a school year later in Role Play Lead, and this student is now down to once or twice a month. How does a game like Dungeons and Dragons help a student manage their anxiety and develop social skills? I'm going to give you a brief example of something that happens all the time in the game of Dungeons and Dragons, and how in this one small moment, we can work on social skill development and anxiety management. First of all, if you have never played Dungeons and Dragons before, here is a very brief overview of how the game works. You gather around a table, your players sit down, and they have a character sheet in front of them. On the character sheet is a series of skills, some of which your character is good at, some of which they're not as good at, which is great because that mirrors us in real life. They also get a pile of dice, and we'll get to that in a moment. Other than that, though, there is actually no game board, no screens. It all takes place in the imagination. It is then up to the role of the DM or Dungeon Master, which is the role that I play within my organization, to set the scene, paint a picture, and tell a collaborative story with their players. For example, I say to my players, all right, you have been walking about a mile in dense forest before you come to this craggy cliffside. In front of you is a large ravine and a bridge that spans the gap. However, There has been some bad weather recently, and it has caused a boulder to fall and land directly at the entrance to the bridge. You cannot cross it as is. What do you do? And it is this moment of what do you do that brings us to the first thing I love about this game. And it is that you can actually try almost anything. However, do you remember that set of dice I told you about earlier? It is often up to the roll of those dice that determines whether you succeed or fail at what you're trying to do. In this particular case, all of the players begin talking to each other, and the player who has the strongest character says, I would like to try and move the boulder out of my way. I say, great, that's an awesome idea. Go ahead and roll your dice. They roll, and they succeed. The boulder rolls out of the way, the group crosses the bridge, and they never look back. But because this is a game of chance, there is an opportunity for them to not succeed on that roll. They fail, unable to move the boulder out of the way. Bringing us to the next moment that I'd like to talk about. When my players roll low and their character does not succeed, I work on developing empathy and self-awareness. I say to that player, tell me what it is that your character is thinking about that's distracting them from succeeding on something they normally do well at. The player thinks for a moment and says, well, in my character's backstory, they were due to go home right now instead of continuing with the group. They're thinking of their friends, their family, their village, and they're distracted. I say, yes, how often does this happen to us in real life? We study for a math test. You know all of the formulas you are going to need to be successful. The morning of that test, you get into a fight with a parent. And then as you sit down at your desk, your test in front of you, instead of recalling all of those formulas that you're going to need, you recall that fight. What can you do in this instance? The player thinks for a moment and says, you know, I could ask the teacher for help, maybe see if I could come back later or reschedule my test for a different day. And I say, yeah, asking for help is a big thing to do, but it's really, really important. What can you do in this game? And that player says, well, I could ask for help here too. And I say, yeah. The player who's controlling the next strongest character says, I'll help them. Great, roll your dice, and we'll look at the two dice together to determine if you succeed. Let's say they roll well. You look at the dice together, both of those characters move the boulder out of the way. The group crosses the bridge and never looks back. But again, chance is a fateful mistress. You might roll, unfortunately, low and still not succeed, even looking at the two dice rolls together. Bringing me to the next thing I'd like to talk about, and that is problem solving and critical thinking. In this moment, two of the strongest characters cannot budge this boulder. The group has to get creative. Someone says, hey, maybe we climb down the ravine. And I say, yeah, but you can't see the bottom. And they say, okay, that's not a good idea. Let's walk through the woods and see if we can find another way across. Say, sure, that's a great idea. Keep in mind, though, the trees are really densely packed. It's going to take you a while. They keep thinking until one of the players raises their hand and says, hey, I have a rope in my inventory. Could my character loop the rope around the boulder? Everybody pulls on the loose end and it moves out of the way. I say, yes, this is a great idea. I want to encourage teamwork. I'm not even going to ask my players to roll their dice. I say, if you all work together on this, you will be successful. Bringing me to the next thing I'd like to talk about, and that is, unlike games like Monopoly or Ticket to Ride, where only one person can win and everyone else has to lose, Dungeons & Dragons is a team game where you succeed or fail together. So think back to the very first attempt at moving the boulder. If that character succeeds, the whole party still gets to cross the bridge, right? But let's say they don't. You get to the very end solution where the rope is used to move the boulder. The group still gets to cross the bridge together, no matter what happens. The last thing I want to highlight today about this game is its work with frustration tolerance. As it happens, the dice some days are your best friends. You roll them and you succeed at everything you try to do. Because balance must be restored to the world, though, the next time you pick up those dice to roll them, you can't succeed no matter how many times you try. As a social skills DM, I get to watch my players. I get to keep a pulse on their anxiety. Again, think back to that game of Monopoly or Ticket to Ride. Once you realize that only one person is going to win and you cannot catch up no matter how much you try, you begin to not care, to check out, to leave the game. You don't learn. In Dungeons & Dragons, I watch my players to gauge where their anxiety is at. They might start off, if they're failing time and time again, I'm not worth it, my character's not worth it, I'm not successful, until they spiral down, and I catch them before they get too low. And I say, you know what? Today has been a tough day, but think about last time we played the game. You were fighting this big bad guy, everyone's health was really, really low, but you got the final killing blow, and you saved everyone's butts. They needed you then, just like they need you now. One bad day does not mean that you are not worth it or good, it just means you're having a bad day. And this really neat thing begins to happen. The rest of the players, after they play together for a couple of weeks, begin to see their own anxiety reflected back at them. They develop empathy and understanding. They might actually step in and become each other's cheerleaders. So I don't have to cheerlead them on. They can see it as it's happening, and it's beautiful. So if you look at this Boulder example, and then consider the very first student I talked about, you can see how a game like Dungeons & Dragons helps build skills, helps students overcome their struggles, and become stronger for it. The boulder is just the first step. The puzzles get bigger, the obstacles get harder, and you have to use that foundation in order to continue on. It is my hope that by now you have a teenager in your mind, your own child, or a family member or friend. Perhaps it's a student in your classroom or a patient in your therapeutic practices, and you are wondering how you can bring this to them. Get online and search applied RPGs or applied role-playing games, and you're going to find organizations across the country. You are going to find them across the world, in fact. You will find training programs as well that are available to you that will certify you or teach you how to use this skill in your own space. Let's say, though, you're already a skilled dungeon master, you're just not sure how you can use a D&D module and build in social skill moments. Well, Roleplay Lead has you covered. We actually are putting together a module that runs just like a Dungeons & Dragons game, but has these moments built in for you. No matter how you choose to bring applied RPGs to your community, it is time that we reevaluate how we teach social skills to our teenagers, because they deserve a safe space to engage in play for leadership. Thank you.